Welcome to the RSM Talk Big podcast.
The question of whether to pass on your wealth before you die is becoming increasingly relevant in Australia. Rising property prices, cost of living pressures, and intergenerational wealth transfer trends mean families are rethinking traditional inheritance. But is gifting early a smart move or a risky move? Over the next 20 years, we estimate 3.5 trillion will be transferred from baby boomers to younger generations in what's being called the Great Australian Wealth Transfer. This massive shift has prompted retirees to consider giving wealth away during their lifetimes to see beneficiaries benefit now. With such a massive shift on the horizon, families are asking, should we gift now or wait? What are the financial, legal, and emotional implications? Hello, I'm Andrew Sykes. I've been a business accountant for over 30 years. I talk about business, money, and the economy to help you get ahead. Welcome to Talk Big. In this episode, I think it's a really interesting topic, talking about that really sensitive and sometimes charged issue of when you hand wealth over. It's not just an emotional or a desire thing. There's obviously a lot of tax and financial implications. Today, I have two experts with me to help discuss this topic. One is Grace Bacon. Grace is a partner in RSM Sydney office and has over 25 years experience in financial services and wealth management. Her expertise lies in providing strategic, tailored financial solutions and wealth management. Grace has been a guest on this podcast before, and welcome, Grace. Looking forward to having a chat.
Thank you for having me again.
Thanks. And I'm also joined by Taryn, who is a principal at Russell Kennedy Law Firm and has been practicing law for over 17 years. She specialises in estate planning, probate and administration, succession law and estate dispute resolution. She is a Master of Law and Legal Practice and a Bachelor of Commerce. So welcome to you, Taryn.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Yeah, and what a great topic. This is certainly something that you do read a lot about, hear a lot about, and it's not just financial. It's not one thing. We've got longer life expectancies. We've got a whole bunch of different factors that feeds into it. But why does it really matter now more than at any other time? What's driving that conversation?
Well, I think from my perspective, what we've seen in the last 2 decades is the rise in property prices, as well as people are living longer. People are living much longer. The average life expectancy now is around 88, 89 years of age. And also with the substantial growth we've seen in the share markets as well, it means people are also having a large superannuation capital base at the end of their lifeline. So that has really been driving the conversations, coupled with the fact that younger families or children of the baby boomers are facing cost of living pressures, higher property prices, as well as education costs, which is actually prompting families to have conversations around, would mum and dad be better off providing some funds to the children earlier as opposed to waiting for when they passed away?
Yeah, and do you see, is this being seen as a way to fast forward financial security for adult children?
It certainly is. I think a lot of concerns for retiree parents is that they're seeing that the children not being able to get into the property market. That has been a bit of a driver. The great Australian dream of owning your own property, and then finding a ways of trying to help their children to get into the property market. So that's prompted the conversations in terms of helping them get into the market, but also as a way to try and help get some funds or pass some funds over to the children while they're alive.
Yeah, and I do think that is a really good point. I think we all have our own personal experiences. I'll be open with mine. I've told my children not to expect an inheritance. They take enough now and I give them plenty. I think there is a really good point in seeing your children enjoy that wealth now, but it doesn't come without risk. Taryn, what are you seeing in terms of risk, and particularly with longevity of parents after they've given some of their inheritance to the children early?
Look, absolutely. I think one of the biggest blind spots is people, like Grace said, are underestimating their longevity. People have to fund retirement not just for 10 or 15 years. It's more like 20 to 30 years. And the risk with early gifting is handing over control of an asset whereby it actually limits your ability to be independent. And for me, estate planning is all about helping people to age confidently and well. So if we're going to do this, it has to be part of a broader estate plan. It has to be documented. You have to have conversations. You have to get advice from people like Grace and myself in terms of future disputes and mitigating the risk that can come with early gifting. And that's not to say it's not a good strategy, but we have to make sure that it's not intersecting and compromising your client's independence in doing so.
Yeah, so quite often, and we'll look at some of the pros and cons because there's an argument for both sides of it. Grace, what are the main advantages of giving the wealth away before death?
Well, I think it allows the gifter, or usually mum and dad, to direct or observe how their funds are going to be used and to make a difference to their loved ones. It also allows them to experience some joy with it rather than when they passed away, they really don't know what happens with the funds. So really having a bit more direction or influence on how the funds would be used. I think that's an advantage. But it's also, as parents, we never stop worrying about our kids, even though, Andrew, you say you're not going to leave anything for your kids. But I think, naturally as parents, we would never really, we don't want to see our kids struggle more than we have. So we want to be, if there is an ability to help them, then, what I'm seeing with some of my more older clients is going, well, I'm going to pass away sooner rather than later, but I've also got a pot of wealth here. I'd rather than help them now rather than wait 5-10 years time.
Yeah, I very much agree with you. And to clarify my estate plan, and I think everybody, doesn't matter what age, you should plan for eventualities. In our mid-60s, my wife and I will give a part of what we've earned to our children. So younger adult children can use it while it advantages them. I'm hoping to live till 90. That means they'll be close to 70.
Probably a reality these days. I mean, if you're in your 50s, I'm in my 50s, we're likely to going to be living to our 90s because of medical advancements. We're a lot more cautious about a healthy lifestyle. And so you're finding clients are living longer. You're finding people in their 60s are likely to live to maybe even the average life expectancy would actually go up to 90 by that. So we do need to, well, first of all, look after ourselves, but equally when there is surplus funds, there might be some considerations of helping the children earlier rather than leaving it till the end when you're not around to be able to work out what happens with the funds.
Yeah. So Taryn, can I ask you, with a strategy like that, what are some of the risks that people often overlook when gifting early?
One of them is, again, loss of control. So I think people, the gift or the act of generosity is amazing if you're in a situation that you can afford to do so. And part of that is really stress testing your future needs with somebody like Grace, because retirement, your needs at age 65 is very different to age, 85. So loss of control. And as I said before, losing control means you're becoming more reliant on somebody else like a child. Again, like Grace said, people are underestimating how long they'll live. And of course, I think the biggest thing is the human element, is that people are underestimating the influence of time on circumstances. So the influence of time on family dynamics and relationships. We're a family, we don't argue about money, but we're not taking into account, the entrance of third parties that have an effect and what that means when we hand over a gift and what exposure that gift is then to that child's circumstances. And then we're talking about things like family law disputes. We're talking about risk of creditors. We're talking about bankruptcy.
If we look at what you've just phrased there, so relationship breakdown, how does relationship breakdown, in fact, take a situation where parents have given a substantial gift to one of their children, and then a year or 2 or 10 years later, there's a relationship breakdown. How is that gift treated?
I'm going to be careful here because I'm straying into family law territory. What will happen is that there is a requirement for full and frank financial disclosure when those parties go into those proceedings, and everything has to be disclosed. An inheritance, even if that inheritance is received by way of a testamentary trust. And the court has the ability to apportion a part of that in terms of the separation and division of assets. And it is not a fixed formula in terms of the family law court.
Yeah.
So I think the issue is that gifting in a vacuum and on an ad hoc basis, while it is generous and it is probably one of the most meaningful things we can do, we have to be very careful that any risks surrounding that are mitigated and people are aware of the consequences when doing that.
So one of the ways to mitigate some of that risk when it comes to family breakdown and you've received a substantial early inheritance or a gift is looking at setting up a binding financial agreement and making sure that those funds or the gift that you've received is segregated, because a binding financial agreement can be set up at any time in the relationship or post the event. And so that a binding financial agreement is one of the ways that people can protect their gift to ensure that, that is not coming into potentially the family law proceedings. Another way to protect the children is also as a substantial gift, you can actually set up a loan arrangement so that it is actually a loan. And then when Taryn's work comes into play with the estate planning side of things, it's about making sure that that loan is then relinquished or as part of the will. So that is another way that we can protect that gift.
And that's really good tips. And the time to do that is before there are any signs of relationship breakdown and arguably before the gift has been made, isn't it? Do that, then make the gift.
It could be a condition of the gift that mum and dad stipulates of giving you this gift, but to protect and having a frank family conversation to say it is a gift, but we're going to set up a binding financial agreement to make sure that if there is a relationship breakdown down the track, this funds belongs to my bloodline as opposed to being,
I think the reality is that we really have to be proactive about this.
Yes.
Because when we are reacting, it's normally in high stress situations. And that is a very expensive exercise, not just emotionally, but financially. So it really has to be structured and informed and not ad hoc. Because especially if that gift is given, it crystallizes and it's very hard to call back.
I always say in these situations, put the agreements in place while the tears of joy are streaming down everyone's face. Before we see signs of bankruptcy, signs of relationship breakdown, generally by that stage, it's too late to do anything about it, isn't it? So once again, like with so much financial health and well-being, it's about plan up front, decide on what your aims and objectives are and put that plan in place. Rather than just sort of running at it and hoping things turn out for the best. But if we talk about things that are, when does it make sense for early gifting? There's some scenarios where it really does make sense to do that.
Yes, look, I think, people have to remember that a gift is something that you give, but you can't take it back when you need it. So really making sure that you scenario test it and backward plan. Usually I would say to clients that if they're in the 60s, it's probably a little bit too early to be gifting because you don't know how long you're going to live, how much funds you need. And the other thing people need to consider these days is that later life care. People are living longer. The need for aged care is higher as well because potentially we're living in a global environment. Children might not be around to look after you. So, you may need to have to considerations and put funds aside for that later life care. So take all that into account first, then think about, okay, well, do you actually have surplus funds to actually give away? So taking that, thinking through all of that first and foremost. And then depending on the asset as well, if it's cash, if you're giving cash, there's no tax implications on doing that. Australia doesn't have gift duties, and we also don't have death duties, but we have something called capital gains tax. When you come to selling an asset, if it's other than cash, if it's property, if it's shares, you will potentially have to trigger a capital gains tax before you can give that asset away. But also even a transfer of the asset is seen as a deemed disposal. So you're going to trigger tax events. And if it's a property, not only you have to worry about capital gains tax, you also have to worry about stamp duty for each of the estate taxes as well. So just taking all that into account, when's the right time to gift would also depend on personal circumstances.
Yeah, and I think you've raised a couple of really good points there that can emphasise is that in Australia, there's no concessions for gifting to family members. And in fact, capital gains tax and stamp duty is all done at market value. So even if you give it away for $1, there's deeming provisions that mean that you pay tax and duty at market value. That's a really strong point when to take into consideration. And I think the other thing I heard from you there is to get a really robust sense of what your financial future's like. You may get to just sort of 85 and run out of money, and the kids just may not give it back if you need it. So make sure you're well provided for and that there's a buffer in there. to allow for your future.
I would probably add the only time when a gifting is considered an issue is if you are on Centrelink benefits, because if you're on Centrelink benefits, then any gifts are actually assessed as an asset. Unless you're unless you're not, if you're not on Centrelink benefits, then there's no issues with gifting. But if people are receiving some form of Centrelink benefit, then they need to consider how that gift might impact their payments.
Yeah, well, there's obviously a lot of tax and financial implications which are complex when you do this. So, Taryn, can I ask you, I've mentioned estate plan. How does early gifting interact with estate plans, wills and future disputes?
It has to be integral to the overall estate plan, 100%. I think the biggest issue that arises is when it's not part of the bigger estate plan and it's not communicated or documented. Misconceptions or perceptions arise to disputes. So it's often not the generosity of the gift itself, it's the understanding or maybe not knowing and people finding out later, oh, but my sister got this gift and I had no idea. So it has to be a conversation. And I always say my idea when I stand on my soapbox of estate planning, my idea is, people go, oh, I'm getting married, I need a will. I'm getting onto a plane to go to Hawaii, I need a will. It has to form part of your life cycle and not just be triggered by certain events. So that's a conversation you have to have with your lawyer at the time to say, this is what I'm considering doing. And it, again, like I said, it has to be integral, because if it's not, and it's not part of the bigger picture, it can cause expectations by certain beneficiaries. Yes, they can expect future gifts, or the siblings can kind of go, well, hold on, where is the equality or fairness in this?
So that's around holding the family meetings, the open discussion. This is my plan. This is what I want to do.
And making a family meeting, Sunday roast, get the family around.
So when we look at that, and we'll get onto family dynamics a bit more in a sec, but legal structures, what can we do to reduce the risk of this?
Documentation is key. And I think if people can think about it from this perspective, so the dispute arises on the person's death, the willmaker's death. The person with all the evidence as to why they've done what they've done is not able to step into the witness box. So how do we provide evidence of what was done and why it was done? Loan documents, even gifts should be documented. You can do a deed of gift, record notes or reasons about why you've done what you've done. A common strategy that we do is we don't air dirty laundry in wills, because wills become public once they are created. We get clients to do a statutory declaration explaining why they've done what they've done, and the executors of the estate can use that to their benefit if proceedings or disputes arise. And the judge will take that into consideration when considering the outcome.
Yeah, and there may be reasons, quite valid reasons, to favour one family member more than another. So it's really around documenting that, isn't it? These are my reasons for what I've done.
And in the context of this, let's just say that fairness in this situation does not equate to equality. Like you said, there may be very good reasons why more provision is made for one child. But in the absence of reasons, that is like a red rag to a bull, and they prompt someone to mount a claim.
Yeah, so they do say that money can bring families together or drive them apart. So Taryn, when you're talking to families, how do you manage those expectations, and what are some of the most common conflicts that arise from early inheritance?
And look, that's a very good point you used, is managing expectations. And part of my role as a succession lawyer is actually to force clients to consider the competing interests of their children and their beneficiaries. And it actually forms part of the will-making capacity test, is going through anybody who's potentially a beneficiary, or if there's a moral obligation to provide for that person, and making them rigorously test why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, you did mention before a fair approach. What does a fair approach look like when children have very different needs?
Well, the fair approach is just being transparent and clear and sharing why you've done what you've done. At the end of the day, everybody has testamentary freedom to do what they choose to do. But like I said, gifting without that structure behind it is basically gambling.
You're gambling on the outcomes that you're going to get.
Exactly. And basing that on your current circumstance. And like we said, that can change. So we all wish we had a crystal ball. That'd be amazing. We don't know. But it's also projecting and kind of going, well, they're fine now. They're financially fine now. But what would it look like in the future? I mean, I have very frank conversations with all my clients when we're talking about their children. And I ask things like, do we have concerns about substance abuse issues, i.e. gambling, drinking, drugs? Can you foresee this person, in 20 years being able to manage their own property and affairs? Or do we need to make sure that it's put into a trust so it is protected in some way? So it's having very real conversations, and it can make clients feel uncomfortable, but that is part of my job in terms of making sure that adequate provision is made for the beneficiaries.
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation, isn't it? As a parent, you can say, I need to look after one child more than the other, but it's also from a child's point of view, whether they're adult or not, it's them hearing mum and dad love you more than they love me. So there's always a lot of emotion involved, isn't it?
100%.
Grace, how do you see this playing out with your clients when they're talking with you about it, how they differentiate between the needs of different children?
Certainly do. I mean, there's also a timing factor too. I'll give you an example. So if a couple has two children, for simplicity's sake, we'll say two children. Let's say 10 years ago they helped one child and helped one child first, and then they gave that child, say, $20,000. But now 10 years later, they want to give the second child the same amount of money. But that $20,000 10 years ago is not $20,000 today. So having to adjust that. With CPI, and because that 20,000 could have been invested into a property or into another asset, but 20,000 10 years ago and versus 20,000 today, you have to adjust that amount to make sure that it looks the same or is the same amount. So because the second child might go, that's not fair because 20,000 10 years ago is not the same as today, so I should be getting more. That's the reality of conversations that children and the families would have about it. So making sure that that's all documented, and because unless you're giving the funds at the same time, but then that's not also practical because it depends on the age of the children at the time or the needs at the time, right? So
it's not an uncommon strategy to say when each child reaches a certain age, I'm going to give them X amount. Certainly, and you don't even need to go back 10 years. Go back before diesel was $3 there a litre, and $10,000 or $20,000 meant a lot more. So it's a really important point. I will emphasise or ask, that having the open discussion seems to be the key thing, doesn't it? Talk to your family, sound them out, communicate with them what your ideas are, your plan. And now, do the two of you get any feedback from the gift recipients, or it's really just from the givers?
We certainly get, usually when I work with my clients around early gifting, I like to ensure that the whole family is involved in that discussion so that there is open and transparent discussions. And in my role, there is really playing the objective person and making sure that everyone is on the same page and understand what mum and dad's intentions are, so that that everyone is receiving the same, getting this is reason why mum is doing this for John versus what are they doing for Mary, so that is all very clear and transparent.
Both Grace and Taryn, it's been a really interesting conversation on what can be a very difficult but also rewarding area. So giving away your inheritance early can't be done lightly. It requires careful planning, clear communication and strategic structuring to avoid financial pitfalls, and importantly to avoid financial friction, or even worse, unintended tax consequences. But when you do it thoughtfully, it can create a living legacy that you actually get to experience. If I could just ask in closing, what are the top 3 actions that listeners should take before they decide to give gift early?
Stress test your own future needs first and do it rigorously and vigorously. Definitely structure it and have it documented. And get advice before and not after you have made that early gift. Yep,
they're great tips. Grace, anything you wanted to add to that?
I think I echo what Taryn says. Seek advice. Make sure that you're having an open and frank family discussion. before you do the gifts. Understand what the specific needs are for each of your gift recipients, because the gift that they receive or the form they receive in might be quite different depending on their needs. And ensuring that it is going to provide them with a meaningful change, financial change to their personal circumstances, as opposed to them swindling it away, going on a holiday versus putting it towards their longer term future.
Yeah, excellent. Look, I think both of you have really well summarised what our discussion has been today, and that's plan it, communicate, and get assistance to make sure you're right. So thank you both. We've explored the financial, legal, emotional risks of early inheritance. So thank you for joining us on Talk Big. Remember, seek professional advice when considering your own financial security, and also communicate openly with your family. Thanks for joining us on Talk Big. If you found this episode helpful, subscribe and share it with your network. Thank you. Being your host again, Andrew Sykes here. Enjoy and see you next time on Talk Big.